Hello everyone and welcome. Make a cup of your favorite drink and get comfortable because this is a wonderful time for news stories from YellowCat. Send your own stories in the comments below and maybe they'll be in our new video. Human resource employees, what are your best HR nightmare stories? I have a few. I had a bookkeeper that paid himself 2 checks every week. We did not catch it for a year. Another bookkeeper quit and files for unemployment. He then claimed a claim with EEOC that he had a disability and we failed to make accommodations for him. The disability was alcoholism and the accommodations were leaving early to attend AA meetings. Seriously, we had to hire a lawyer to fight that. A guy I hired hurt himself on the first hour of the first day of work. He claimed he fell and hit his head on the wall. He was out for weeks on workman's comp from the concussion. Then, when he came back on light duty, he could only do desk work but managed to fall again in the bathroom and hit his head again. It took me 9 months to get rid of him. It turns out this was not his first rodeo. When I called his former employer, the lady I spoke to made an offhand comment about workplace accidents and head injuries and the importance of cameras in the workplace. While doing a remodel of a museum, one of my employees helped himself to a gun that was on display. It was very ugly and embarrassing for everyone. My company was kicked off the job and banned from ever working for them again. I fired the guy and he filed a discrimination claim with EEOC because I did not fire the whole crew, just him. I used to work for a company that is an HR nightmare. Several events occurred. 1. I was hired as a director of quality/regulatory, so I come in and start sprucing up documents, policy, and all the essential stuff. A VP of sales doesn't take too kindly to fixing the stuff they were lying, fraud, about telling me in front of HR. I'm going to make you so miserable that you quit this job. Still works there. 2. Another sales guy went into a coma, health issue, and the higher-ups decided that they could fire him to keep their insurance cheaper and not pay out his life insurance. Luckily, HR pointed out the potential lawsuit. After they debated the cost of the lawsuit and whether they could win, they kept him on until he passed a week later. 3. When I left, I had my own company. They decided they owned any IP I created when I was employed there. I had no contract and non-competes aren't legal in my state. 4. The C-level employees all were convicted of corruption in multiple countries and are in jail. I had a friend working at GM when HR thought it was a good idea to test everyone on the skill set needed for their department regardless of how long they were in their position. Long careers, 15, 20, 25 years, were ruined because even though they worked there for a long time with a long string of great performance reviews, they didn't pass the test measured what HR thought was required for the department. Say you're a materials expert working in a design department. You may know barely enough in the CAD system to draw a cylinder. On the other hand, given a cylinder, you can whip out all the properties that cylinder would have if it were made from aluminum, cold-rolled steel, fiberglass, etc. You'd be out of your job because HR said you had to have a certain level of CAD expertise even if it wasn't relevant to your role in the design process. My company used to give branded gifts to our clients. One employee volunteered to drive one about an hour away, and he took another employee with him. What he didn't tell anyone is that he didn't have a license, his car was unregistered, and his brakes were bad. So, inevitably, his brakes failed while trying to stop at an intersection and he totaled his car. Thankfully, no one was seriously hurt, but he got into trouble when the cops came. I was asked to translate for some visitors from the parent company at a celebration held by HR. I stopped translating around the time the director of HR started asking overly personal-esque questions to the 2 young HR office ladies. A couple days later, during a private BS session, I recounted the story to a friend who happened to be a director from the parent company. He put on his professional hat and asked me to write it up and submit a complaint to the parent company's HR. Nightmare ensued. Local head of HR had been in charge of the harassment avoidance training that had narrowly saved them from lawsuit. CEO of local company insisted that I bring the story out in public and talk to the director of HR like an adult. Parent company HR brought in HR from another local subsidiary to perform an investigation. It became painfully obvious who the whistleblower was. Nothing came of the investigation that I heard about, but the next year was made to be a living H for me by the local company. Even the office lady who had been the subject of the Inquisition resented the fact that she was in the center of a controversy. I left that company as soon as I possibly could and was not saddened to hear of their bankruptcy and a partition a couple of years later. They had other issues as well. I work in HR and we recently moved from one HRIS system to another. System manages personal information like benefits, time of requests, contact information, etc. Part of the transitioning is teaching the workforce how to use the app. There are a lot of challenges, including the boomers who are technologically illiterate, employees who speak very little English, and managers who think learning the system is below their pay grade. I'm normally pretty patient with the language barrier. I mean, it's not like I'm bilingual either, so if they have the basics of English as a second language, they already know more than I do. This one fine day, I had a constrained team of employees trying to figure out how to access the system in their phones despite the step-by-step written and pictorial instructions when I have this one older individual ask me to help him. Nothing but XXX Hardcore P would come up on his smartphone browser. He legit couldn't understand why I couldn't help him. The browser just kept going back to P no matter what I typed in. I usually feel like I can figure people's phones out, but I reached my limit. I couldn't tell if the poor guy had a virus on his phone or if he was effing with me. Creepy old guy my father's age, barely speaks English, and not embarrassed by the raunchy P stuck on his screen. I told him to go get his phone cleaned up and don't come back with it until he fixed it. I haven't seen him since. The nightmare of an HR employee potentially causing the HR nightmare. I took a grad course meant to prep future school principals on HR stuff. One of our assignments was to ask our current principal for redacted copies of disciplinary letters they'd written to use as examples to practice writing our own. This assignment seemed sketchy from the get-go, but whatever. It's grad school and I want an A. The course was taught by the HR director who'd helped hire me and my building principal in the same school year. The principal didn't have any letters from before I started there, so just gave me a couple random ones. Somehow, the professor was still surprised when I came to class knowing all the details of each write-up despite the absence of detail in the letters. The professor flipped out a little because he was worried the principal had broken some confidentiality rule. It was actually just that I happened to be friends with the two that had been written up. Teacher HR is a nightmare unto itself. Not an HR employee, but a manager who is handed an HR nightmare to help resolve. Someone will get a kick out of this. Background: I was working as a teller manager in a small regional bank. My branch has 6 small colleges within a 30-minute drive. The company liked to hire college students to work as tellers because they usually didn't want to work full-time, no benefits, therefore cheaper to employ, and with their somewhat random availability, it was easy to schedule even the unpopular shifts. All of the tellers in my branch are college students. I get a call from the regional HR manager. He is transferring a teller to my location from another branch across town who has been nothing but a headache. I am to document every single thing that this teller does wrong, no matter how minor the infraction. Apparently, she had ticked off all of her coworkers there by filing HR complaints against all of them. I'll call her TT, transfer teller, from here on. I was able to get more detail out of one of her managers. TT was a student at one of the local colleges, but her only hobbies were riding her horse and going to her church. The only things she ever wanted to talk about were her horse, her beliefs, and trying to convert coworkers to her religion. Talk about anything else, and she'd find a way to connect the topic to violating her beliefs. Criticize her or talk about something that she wouldn't do, and she'd file a harassment complaint. TT was transferred to my branch, and on her first day, she went off on another teller for talking about a date said teller's boyfriend had taken her on. The next day, she filed her first HR complaint as harassment against one of my staff for talking about using a certain famous dating app. Speaking to TT while taking the complaint, discovered she's very socially conservative. The employee handbook said, in summary, on the topic of harassment, what counts depended on what offended the most easily offended person present, so watch your mouth and where you talked. I pulled each teller into a one-on-one meeting, walked them through the sections of the handbook on harassment, and warned them to be careful of what they discussed where. I did not call out TT, but everyone guessed who we were talking about. Word about her had made its way around the grapevine. Over the course of the next couple weeks, she filed a new complaint roughly every other day. All of the complaints were for coworkers talking about or doing normal things for 18 to 22-year-olds, such as a coworker went to a party and had a one-night stand, saw a coworker hug her boyfriend when he brought her lunch, a coworker wore a blouse that showed a bit of cleavage, a coworker refused to get up early on Sunday to come to church with her. Morale was low. Everyone is stressed coming in every day. Most of the staff are refusing to talk to TT. I'm grumbling to HR manager who just answers everything with document her infractions. So I'm writing up every minor mistake, categorizing them, and for each category, I think I have enough composing a formal write-up and submitting it to HR for approval. I wish I could remember how many I wrote. Was sure we'd be stuck with TT for months before I had enough tardies or drawer errors for HR to be willing to fire her. But after a month, she made the error we needed. There's a religious group that's well known in our state, and the group's HQ is in our city. The group's religious leader occasionally would come into my branch. For some reason, he liked dropping off deposits and transfers himself. It didn't take much to get him preaching on a topic. Everyone would just smile and nod along while finishing his transaction. But TT couldn't do that. Apparently, her church takes some issues with what his church teaches. He came in to run a transaction. She calls him next out of line. While running his transaction, she recognized the name of the church. They started talking, then arguing, then she was yelling at him. Unfortunately, I was in the back, so I missed this. Fortunately, I was in the bank, so it went on long enough that her customer took offense. She was dragged into the back to separate them. He filed a complaint, which I wrote up as an official customer complaint. Those get reviewed by a VP and the operations director, but I also CC'd HR manager. Religious harassment of a commercial customer with a few millions on deposit was sufficient for HR to terminate her the next day. Guys, thank you for all of the support and likes. Subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet. See you next time.